There is a strange kind of madness in wanting to become unforgettable. A record begins as a number grows into an obsession, and somewhere along the way, survival becomes negotiable. In this episode of The Last Reels, 25 Disturbing Tragedies reveal what happens when human ambition keeps moving forward long after common sense has stepped aside. These were not people casually chasing danger. They believed in their training, their machines, their calculations, and the intoxicating idea that every risk could be controlled. But nature does not care about confidence, applause, or headlines. It only takes one overlooked weakness for a dream to collapse into a permanent warning. Tonight, we enter the thin, terrifying space between greatness and catastrophe, beginning with number 25, where apparent perfection created the most dangerous illusion of all. Real stories, final moments, lasting echoes. Welcome to The Last Reels. Number 25. Fred Fugan and Vince Rafé. The illusion of perfection. High above the snow-covered peaks of the Swiss Alps in 2017, two men stepped off Jungfrau Mountain not to fall toward the earth, but to chase a moving Pilatus Porter aircraft. Fred Fugan and Vince Rafé were executing a stunt with no wires and a margin for error measured in seconds. As they accelerated toward the plane's open door at immense speed, they faced shifting mountain winds and violent aircraft turbulence. A slight misalignment would have sent them hurtling past the plane with absolutely no way to correct their course. Against every survival instinct, they slipped inside the cabin flawlessly. The footage instantly went viral, celebrated worldwide as the ultimate triumph of human precision. For many, this breathtaking video served as definitive proof that wingsuit flying could be fully controlled. It sold a flawless illusion of safety. But what the millions of viewers sharing that perfect docking never stopped to ask was what happens when that microscopic margin of error suddenly vanishes. While the internet cheered a masterclass in airborne geometry, the brutal reality of the sport had already been captured a year earlier in the French Alps, where a completely routine jump over a calm forest silently transformed into an inescapable nightmare. Number 18. Jessi Combmes, The Roar of the Desert. On September 29, 2016, the weather in the French Alps was perfectly calm. When Eric dos Santos stepped off the mountain edge, his helmet camera captured the relaxed wave of a pilot who had executed this exact maneuver countless times. For nearly 60 seconds, the footage documents a textbook flight. His shadow races smoothly across the deep green canopy below, projecting an image of total mastery. Then, without a single warning sign, that serene glide collapses. Eric rapidly loses altitude, dropping terrifyingly close to the trees at over 90 miles per hour. In a fraction of a second, his speed plummets, his control vanishes entirely, and the recording abruptly cuts to black. Against staggering mathematical odds, Eric survived the impact. Suffering multiple fractures and severe internal trauma, his grueling recovery marked him as only the second person on record to survive a full-speed wingsuit crash without deploying a parachute. The chilling video circulated the globe, effectively stripping away the sport's illusion of absolute safety. It served as a definitive warning of how quickly gravity can overpower an isolated jumper. Number 3. Collision would reveal that the ultimate threat wasn't a fellow competitor, but the very machine that brought them into the clouds. Number 23. Nicholas G. Threats from the Sky. On July 27, 2018, the greatest threat to a wingsuit pilot wasn't the jagged cliffs or the dense forests below it, was the sky above. Nicholas G., a highly experienced flyer, exited a single-engine aircraft at roughly 14,000 feet. As he and another skydiver dropped away into the calm, open air, the pilot immediately initiated a rapid descent to circle back for the next group of jumpers. But a fatal sequence of misjudgments had already been set in motion. There had been no proper pre-jump briefing, and investigators later discovered the pilot was operating the aircraft without a valid license. Believing the jumpers were safely out of range, the plane unknowingly dropped directly into Nicholas's downward flight path. Just 20 seconds into his descent, Nicholas collided squarely with the wing of the very machine he had just leapt from, ending his life on contact. The unprecedented disaster led to a criminal trial, resulting in a manslaughter conviction for the pilot and exposing a severe breakdown in basic aviation oversight. Nicholas was a victim of someone else's reckless miscalculation, completely powerless to change his fate. Yet in the extreme sports world, taking total control of your environment is supposed to be the ultimate shield, a philosophy that drove another famous pilot to pursue absolute surgical precision until he misjudged a mountain by a single unforgiving inch. Number 22. Ulie Emanuel. The price of perfection. For Ulie, Emanuel flight wasn't a chaotic adrenaline rush. It was an exacting surgical discipline. By 2014, he had redefined physical limits, threading his wingsuit through a natural Swiss cave opening measuring just over 6 feet wide. 2 years later, he pushed the boundaries again, gliding cleanly through a suspended ring of fire in the Italian Alps. Every variable, wind patterns, terrain angles, and body position was meticulously calculated down to the millimeter, creating an aura of untouchable perfection. He completed dozens of these highly technical proximity flights without incident. But in August 2016, the illusion of total control was fatally broken. While navigating a narrow rock formation in the treacherous Dolomites, an infinitesimal miscalculation altered his flight line. He drifted merely an inch too close to the jagged cliff face. With zero altitude to deploy a parachute and a fraction of a second to react, the impact was immediate. The loss of someone so incredibly methodical deeply rattled the extreme sports world, proving that gravity never negotiates, regardless of a pilot's flawless technique. Yet while Ulie's tragedy exposed the limits of solitary perfection, the community's confidence would shatter completely when the same unforgiving terrain claimed someone who hadn't just mastered the sky, but had spent over a decade teaching others how to survive it. Number 21. Richard Pusy, the fall of the teacher. Richard Pusy wasn't just a participant in the extreme sports world. He was the instructor teaching others how to survive it. Armed with 2 decades of skydiving experience and 14 years dedicated to base jumping, he was a respected mentor who understood the risks better than anyone. On January 7th, 2022, Richard stood at the edge of a legendary Moab exit point known as Super Gorgeous, overlooking the sprawling red terrain of Castle Valley. He stepped off the cliff for a high-speed proximity flight, disappearing from the view of his jump partner waiting above. There were no cameras rolling and no witnesses to what happened next. The only record of his descent was a sudden automated SOS signal transmitted by his satellite tracking device, instantly registering an extreme impact. Rescue teams rushed to the coordinates, locating him on a steep talus slope, 1,000 feet below the jump point. He was already gone. Authorities never released an official cause, leaving the final seconds of a master pilot as an enduring mystery. His loss stood as a chilling warning that decades of expertise offer zero protection when the margin for survival is measured in inches. Richard's isolated tragedy was terrifying precisely because he faced it alone. Number 20. Donald Campbell. The Fury of the Waters. On the morning of January 4th, 1967, the icy surface of Coniston Lake offered a false sense of calm. 45-year-old British racing legend Donald Campbell had already broken the world water speed record 7 times. But one elusive milestone remained: 300 miles per hour. He climbed into the Bluebird K-7, a jet-powered hydroplane generating 3,500 pounds of thrust. At 8:45 a.m., he launched across the lake, clocking 297 miles per hour on his first pass. Agonizingly close. Instead of stopping to refuel and let the water settle, Campbell made the fateful decision to immediately start his return run. As the Bluebird accelerated, the surface grew increasingly rough. Over the radio, his voice was steady as he called out, "Full power!" Seconds later, the transmission captured his final, chilling realization. "I am upside down." At over 300 miles per hour, the nose lifted. The craft flipped high into the air and crashed nose first into the lake. Rescuers arrived to find only scattered debris. Decades passed before the wreckage was finally recovered from the depths. Campbell placed his absolute trust in a precision-engineered jet machine, only to be betrayed by the physics of water and speed. Yet thousands of miles away, another record chaser would soon find himself suspended in a fatal trap, relying on no engine at all, only a zip line and the strength of his own hair. Number 19. Sailendra Nath Roy. Trapped in midair. High above the rushing waters of India's Tista River, hundreds of spectators gathered to watch a man defy gravity. Sailendra Nath Roy, a 49-year-old police driver, had built a reputation on turning physical extremes into public spectacles. Having already pulled a train with his ponytail, he now aims to cross a high-altitude zipline suspended solely by his hair. Wearing a life jacket and carrying the national flag, Roy pushed off the platform, gliding forward as the cheering crowd watched history unfold. Halfway across the expanse, his momentum suddenly halted. Roy's hair had become severely tangled in the pulley's wheel mechanism, locking him in place. At first, onlookers assumed the sudden stop was simply part of a dramatic act. But as minutes ticked by and Roy reached upward, struggling to untwist the strands, the cheers slowly faded into an uneasy silence. Suspended high in the air, the physical strain on his body compounded with every passing second. By the time delayed rescue efforts finally brought him down, he was unresponsive, and he did not survive the ordeal. The event prompted immediate public scrutiny regarding the severe lack of emergency preparation. Roy was undone by a static trap suspended helplessly in the open air, but halfway across the world, another pioneer would soon be betrayed by the exact opposite. The uncontrollable velocity of a jet-powered machine tearing across a silent desert. Number 18. Jessi Combmes. The Roar of the Desert. The cracked, salt floor of Oregon's Alvord Desert offered endless miles of flat, empty space, the perfect canvas for a retired fighter jet repurposed for the ground. On August 27, 2019, Jessi Combmes secured herself inside that jet-powered machine. Already holding the title of the fastest woman on 4 wheels, the renowned builder, engineer, and television personality had spent years preparing to claim the absolute women's land speed record. As the engine ignited, the vehicle tore across the desert, pushing past 500 miles per hour. Inside the cockpit, Combmes executed the run with strict precision, holding the massive machine steady as the horizon blurred. The high-speed attempt appeared flawless. But as she initiated the deceleration process, a sudden mechanical failure compromised the vehicle's stability. The run abruptly ended in a catastrophic accident, and despite the rapid arrival of emergency response teams, she did not survive. Her final velocity was later officially recognized, securing her legacy as a pioneer who fearlessly engineered her own path into the record books. She was an adult, making a highly technical, calculated choice at the absolute peak of her career. Yet when the blinding pressure of national media shifts from a seasoned professional to a 7-year-old child, the drive to conquer the sky takes on a far more unsettling tone. Number 17. Jessica Dubro. Jessica Dubro, A Flight of Innocence. At just 7 years old, Jessica Dubro sat on a booster seat simply to reach the controls of a Cessna 177B. It was April 11th, 1996, and the media had enthusiastically dubbed her cross-country journey Sea to Shining Sea. The goal was to make her the youngest person to fly across the United States. But behind the rolling cameras and national broadcasts, a dangerous momentum was building. The itinerary was relentless fatigue was setting in, and despite her basic flight lessons, the young girl was not truly the one in command. On the morning of their departure from Cheyenne, Wyoming, the weather shifted drastically. Rain, high winds, and hail swept over the runway. The aircraft was already heavily loaded with fuel and equipment. Yet driven by the intense pressure to maintain their heavily promoted public schedule, the adults in the cockpit made the fateful decision to take off. The heavy plane struggled to gain altitude. It climbed only a few hundred feet before entering an unstable turn, rapidly descending into a nearby residential street. The crash claimed all 3 lives on board. The resulting outcry forced a nationwide reckoning, leading to strict new aviation laws that barred children from attempting high-stakes aeronautical records. Legislation could finally protect a child from the unbearable weight of public expectations. Yet battling the environment is only part of the equation when the fatal threat isn't the terrain below, but the competitor flying directly into your blind spot. Number 16. Amy Jean St. Hilaire. Deadly blind spot. At just 27 years old, Amy Jean St. Hilaire had built a reputation on absolute discipline. With over 1,000 successful jumps to his name, he viewed wingsuit flying not as a reckless thrill, but as an exacting science. In 2018, that precision brought him to the wide-open wingsuit series, an elite competition where the world's best pilots race shoulder to shoulder through the open sky. In these tight formations, flyers rely entirely on spatial awareness and split-second timing to avoid disaster. Shortly after launching, however, the race deteriorated. Amy Jean and another competitor lost visual contact. What followed was a brief moment of instability, ending in a high-speed mid-air collision. The impact rendered the seasoned pilot instantly unconscious. Stripped of his awareness, all his accumulated skill and meticulous training became utterly useless. Unable to deploy his parachute, he fell at extreme speed, eventually striking the roof of a residence in Riverside County, California. The tragedy stunned the extreme sports community, proving that even a master of the air cannot survive a chain of bad luck triggered by a shared blind spot. It was a harsh reminder that the deadliest variable in a jump is often the person flying next to you. But no law can negotiate with gravity when hundreds of elite professionals step out of a plane at 18,000 feet. Number 15. Diana Paris. A void in the sky. 18,000 feet above the Arizona desert, 222 skydivers stepped out of multiple aircraft and accelerated past 100 miles per hour. It was April 3rd, 2014, and the group was attempting to set a new world record for the largest sequential free-fall formation. Among them was Diana Paris, a 46-year-old German athlete with over 1,500 successful jumps to her name. She knew exactly how to handle the extreme altitude and complex coordination. The first massive human pattern locked together flawlessly. However, as the divers separated to reposition for the second sequence, Paris encountered a critical equipment malfunction. In the uncompromising physics of freefall, the window to correct a gear failure is measured in fractions of a second. Reports indicated that while she initiated emergency protocols, her altitude dropped far too rapidly, and the margin for recovery vanished. Paris did not survive the descent. The tragedy devastated the international skydiving community. Rather than abandon the attempt, her teammates later returned to the sky, completing the record while deliberately leaving one position empty in the formation, a physical gap honoring her absence. The modern gear Paris relied on failed her in the open air, a sudden mechanical betrayal that deeply echoes an older aviation disaster where a golden age speed plane tore itself apart in mid-flight. Number 14. Orwell Richard Bales. A machine that devours its master. In the golden age of air racing, the sky over Detroit became the ultimate proving ground. Born in 1900, Richard Bales had abandoned a career in mining engineering for the unparalleled thrill of aviation. By the early 1930s, he was piloting the GB Model Z, a small, aggressive aircraft built by the Granville brothers strictly for velocity. After claiming victory at the prestigious Thompson Trophy race, Bales set his sights on a new land plane speed record. On December 5, 1931, spectators lined the airfield to witness history. The engine roared flawlessly as Bales pushed the experimental plane faster across the horizon. But raw power cannot outrun structural limits. Without warning, the aircraft pitched sharply upward. Under the sudden extreme physical stress, the right wing suffered a catastrophic failure, breaking apart in mid-flight. Control was instantly lost, and the plane rapidly descended, striking the ground near a desolate railroad track. Bales did not survive the attempt. His passing stunned the aviation community, standing as a sobering reminder of an era where a machine's ambition dangerously outpaced its own engineering. A fractured wing tore Bales from the sky, but decades later, inside a packed stadium, it would not take a broken machine to pull a man back to Earth, only a microscopic shift in the angle of a single tire mid-air. Number 13. Javad Palisbanian, the invisible force of attraction. On August 27, 2005, Tehran's packed Azadi Stadium buzzed with the anticipation of a historic motorcycle stunt. 44-year-old Javad Palisbanian had built a career on defying physics. Fresh off a successful jump across a wide river, the seasoned rider prepared for an unprecedented feat, launching over 22 buses lined up side by side. The engine roared as he accelerated toward the ramp. His launch appeared absolutely flawless. For a breathtaking moment, Palisbanian soared high above the first several vehicles with total control. But halfway across the massive expanse, the uncompromising laws of gravity took hold. The front wheel of the motorcycle dipped just a fraction of a degree. It was a microscopic shift in his trajectory, yet in mid-air, it was enough to irreversibly alter his parabolic arc. The motorcycle made heavy contact with one of the buses, bringing the attempt to a sudden, devastating halt. The live television broadcast abruptly cut away as a stunned, uneasy silence fell over the arena. Emergency responders rushed the field, but official accounts confirmed that Palisbanian did not survive the impact. He had entrusted his life to precise calculations of speed and distance, only to be pulled from the sky by a momentary imbalance. But while Palisbanian fought gravity in the open air. But the illusion of safety shatters entirely when a single misjudged landscape traps multiple seasoned experts flying perfectly in sync. Number 12. Dan Vickery, Ludvic Warth, Brian Drake. Collective mistake. On April 23, 2014, 3 shadows dropped from a helicopter over Switzerland's remote Lutenal Valley. Dan Vickery, Ludvic Warth, and Brian Drake were orchestrating a synchronized proximity flight demanding absolute collective precision. The elite trio intended to follow a steep flight line over a ridge, utilizing the natural downhill slope to maintain critical speed and lift. But high above the terrain, a shared misjudgment silently altered their trajectory. Instead of clearing the peak, the formation circled around it, suddenly, encountering the worst possible landscape for a wingsuit pilot: flat ground. Without a downward angle, their necessary lift rapidly evaporated. Realizing they were trapped, the group executed a desperate, sharp left turn, aiming for a hidden section of steep terrain. They missed the saving slope by mere feet. 2 died on impact, while the third succumbed to his injuries days later. The devastating event exposed a chilling psychological trap when multiple pilots commit to a single navigational error. Their shared momentum erases any chance for individual recovery. Yet while some flyers fall victim to collective mistakes in quiet valleys, others actively isolate themselves to hunt down forbidden, high-profile jump sites, building legendary reputations by bypassing every legal boundary until the mountain finally pushes back. Number 11. Graham Dickinson, the Legend of the Fall. Graham Dickinson built his legacy by treating the sky as a lawless frontier. In April 2014, he recorded an illegal base jump from a moving gondola in Canada, stepping into thin air with a casual, "Here we go." The footage branded him an invincible maverick, willing to bypass every safety norm. On January 25, 2017, that relentless ambition brought him to China's Tianmen Mountain National Forest. He intended to fly through Heaven's Gate, a massive 400-foot natural arch known as one of the world's most demanding routes. His helmet camera documented a confident entry, but midway through the glide, his flight line suddenly deviated. In mere seconds, his speed spiked, his altitude disappeared, and complete control vanished. He struck the sheer cliff at an extreme velocity. When a large search team located him the next day, they found a fully equipped pilot who had simply run out of airspace. His loss served as a chilling reminder that gravity does not negotiate with legendary status. Dickinson fell while actively chasing the absolute edge of human capability. But the mountain's unforgiving nature isn't reserved solely for those hunting the extreme. Sometimes it quietly claims the most cautious and grounded individuals. On the exact afternoon they promised to leave the sky behind forever. Another man would soon seek a record by willingly surrendering to the crushing weight of the earth, sealing himself in absolute darkness. Number 10. Janaka Basnayak. Janaka Basnayak, the silence beneath the ground. In the quiet town of Kahawata, Sri Lanka, 24-year-old Janaka Basnayak sought recognition not through mechanical velocity, but by testing the absolute limits of human biology. He had already buried himself underground twice before emerging safely each time to local acclaim. This prior success built a dangerous level of confidence. On March 3, 2012, Basnayak escalated the stakes. A 10-foot trench was excavated in the ground. Friends and family watched as he climbed inside, taking his position beneath wooden boards before heavy soil was packed directly over him. The objective was to endure the burial longer than anyone had previously documented. As hours slowly ticked by, the crowd's initial excitement gave way to a mounting, quiet unease. When the agreed duration finally ended, the earth was urgently cleared away. Basnayak was lifted from the trench, but he was entirely unresponsive. Despite a frantic rush to the nearest hospital, he did not survive. While the exact medical cause remained uncertain, the reality was clear. His body had simply exhausted its capacity to function. Basnayak willingly surrendered to the crushing weight of the earth, relying on the people above to pull him back to the light. Yet thousands of miles away, another pioneer would seek a different kind of extreme isolation, intentionally descending into a dark, aquatic abyss where no rescue team could reach him. Number 9. Guy Garmin, Dock. Deep lost in the dark. 1,200 feet below the surface is an alien world where survival relies entirely on precision. Dr. Guy Garmin, an ear, nose, and throat specialist known to his peers as Doc Deep, intended to conquer it. On August 15, 2015, Garmin arrived at Long Reef to attempt the deepest open-water dive in recorded history. He was fiercely meticulous, having anchored a 1,300-foot dive line to the ocean floor and successfully tested an 815-foot solo descent months prior. After entering the water, his son swam beside him for the initial stage before watching his father fade into the dark blue alone. The dive plan was strictly mathematical. Reach the target depth, then ascend to meet a support team at 350 feet for critical decompression stops. But as the scheduled rendezvous time passed, the water remained undisturbed. The support divers waited, scanning the silent ocean, but Garmin never appeared. Following days of extensive searching, he was finally located, having not survived the attempt. The exact mechanical or physiological failure that occurred remains an unresolved mystery, permanently concealed by the abyss. Garmin was lost executing a highly calculated vertical plunge in complete isolation. But thousands of miles away, a massive horizontal journey, completely exposed to the world, was about to be cut short by an entirely different kind of unpredictable force. Number 8. Juan Francisco Villa Honorato, a tragic final stage. For nearly 5 years, the entire world served as the proving ground for 47-year-old Chilean cyclist Juan Francisco Villa Honorato. Beginning in 2010, his objective was an unprecedented feat of human endurance, riding 250,000 kilometers across 5 continents to set a new world record. He pedaled through 49 countries, enduring freezing winds, scorching deserts, and crowded cities, often accompanied by his wife and young son. By early 2015, the grueling horizontal odyssey was in its final stretch, with the finish line merely months away. But on February 21st, while navigating a highway in northeastern Thailand, the record attempt was abruptly shattered by an external force entirely out of his control. A pickup truck traveling at high speeds suddenly lost traction, veering directly into his path. The ensuing collision ended the historic journey in a fraction of a second. While official reports noted that his wife and child survived the crash with minor injuries, Villa Honorato did not. He had survived the harshest environments across the globe, only to be stopped by the unpredictable chaos of open road traffic. He was struck down in plain sight by an erratic vehicle, but the next pioneer would willingly strap herself to a weighted sled descending far away from the eyes of the world, to face the silent, crushing pressure of the deep sea. Number 7. Audrey Mestre, Crushing Pressure. On October 12, 2002, the calm waters off the Dominican Republic concealed a deadly environment. Audrey Mestre, a deeply respected athlete and marine biologist, was preparing to descend further than any woman had ever gone in the extreme no-limits free-diving category. She aimed for a staggering depth of 171 meters. Relying on a weighted sled, she plunged rapidly into an abyss where human lungs compress and the heart slows to a crawl. The descent was flawless, but survival depended entirely on the journey back up. At the target depth, protocol dictated she inflate a lift bag using a tank of compressed air to power her rapid ascent. But when she engaged the mechanism, the tank failed to provide the necessary buoyancy. Stranded under crushing pressure, her return was stalled by a catastrophic equipment malfunction and shifting currents. By the time delayed rescue efforts finally brought her to the surface, the window for survival had already closed. Her loss devastated the diving world, instantly triggering fierce industry-wide debates over the lack of stringent emergency protocols and external oversight in extreme depth attempts. Mestre trusted a mechanical air tank to pull her from the dark, only to be betrayed by its failure. Yet equipment does not only malfunction in the silent depths of the ocean, it can be just as unforgiving when tearing across miles of blinding white salt. Number 6. Peter Farley. Chain drama. High above the Hume Highway in New South Wales, a seemingly routine weekend climb aboard a small Cessna aircraft was about to expose a fatal flaw in extreme sports oversight. On December 8, 2012, 17 jumpers prepared for a massive group exit at 14,000 feet. Peter Farley and fellow wingsuit flyer Scott Hingardy were the final two to clear the plane. But clear weather offered zero protection when chaos erupted in the first moments of the descent. Just seconds after leaving the aircraft, the two men collided violently in midair. The staggering impact left Scott disoriented but conscious enough to manually pull his parachute. Peter, however, was knocked completely unconscious. Stripped of all awareness, he plummeted without the ability to deploy his primary canopy. While his automatic backup system eventually triggered, the preset altitude was far too low to halt his momentum. He struck the ground near a construction site and could not be revived. Official investigations later uncovered severe systemic failures, citing missing qualifications and poor administrative oversight. The devastating loss forced a nationwide tightening of aviation regulations, proving that organizational blind spots can be just as lethal as a jagged cliff. Yet while Peter's fate was sealed by human error and administrative negligence, the environment is equally merciless to those who attempt to eliminate human error entirely, relying on complex mathematical formulas to outsmart the wind. Number 5. Chris Rash. The Trap of White Salt. The endless white expanse of the Bonneville Salt Flats demands absolute perfection from the machines that cross it. On August 3, 2025, 60-year-old Chris Rashke arrived to meet that demand. As a deeply respected veteran of the Speed Demon racing team and a technical expert in motorsports components, he knew better than anyone that extreme velocity leaves zero room for error. That afternoon, he secured himself inside the Speed Demon 3 Streamliner, a specialized vehicle built exclusively for piston-driven records. The initial acceleration across the salt was entirely stable. Passing the 2.5-mile mark, Rashke was traveling at nearly 280 miles per hour. But in a fraction of a second, the meticulously planned run unraveled. The Streamliner veered abruptly off its straight trajectory. The resulting crash was catastrophic, and despite the immediate arrival of emergency personnel, the veteran driver could not be saved. His loss cast a heavy shadow over the annual Speed Week, standing as a stark warning that decades of technical expertise cannot always outmaneuver a sudden mechanical deviation. Rashke's tragedy proved how quickly a microscopic imbalance can destabilize a machine on solid ground, an unforgiving reality that another legendary speed pioneer had encountered decades earlier, not on blinding white salt, but on the dark, shifting surface of a Scottish lake. Number 4. John Rhodes Cobb. The Punishment of the Lake. By 1947, the international press had already crowned John Rhodes Cobb the fastest man alive. The British motor racing pioneer had dominated the Bonneville salt flats, pushing land speed records to a staggering 394 miles per hour. But terrestrial milestones were no longer enough. Cobb wanted the water speed record, commissioning a sleek, lightweight, jet-powered boat named the Crusader. On September 29, 1952, thousands of spectators lined the shores of Scotland's Loch Ness to watch him claim it. Conditions were declared ideal. Cobb launched the Crusader across the measured mile, accelerating well past the 200-mile-per-hour mark to comfortably eclipse the standing world record. But at extreme velocity, water behaves like concrete. The boat suddenly began to oscillate. Within seconds, an uncontrollable aerodynamic instability took hold, and the Crusader violently broke apart directly across the surface of the lake. Rescue teams reached the debris field quickly, but Cobb could not be saved. Official investigations later concluded that a microscopic structural imbalance at that immense speed triggered the catastrophic failure. Cobb's machine was torn apart upon the water in plain sight, a brutally swift mechanical destruction. Yet decades later, in a deep blue hole in the Bahamas, another athlete would emerge on the ocean's surface, perfectly intact, only to face a quiet, invisible failure deep within his own biology. Number 3. Nicholas Mavi. A one-way journey of breath. Dean's blue hull in the Bahamas drops over 200 meters into the earth, drawing elite freedivers to its silent, sapphire waters. On November 17, 2013, American athlete Nicholas Mavi entered the water with a clear objective, establishing a new national record in the constant weight without fins category. This discipline demands extraordinary physical output, requiring the diver to descend and ascend, relying entirely on a single breath and their own strength. Mavi executed a highly controlled 72-meter descent. Pushing through immense pressure, he completed the grueling journey back up and successfully broke the surface of the water. For a brief moment, the record appeared secure, but almost immediately, severe physical distress set in. The immense physiological strain had quietly overwhelmed his system. Despite the rapid response of on-site safety personnel and an urgent transfer to a medical center, he could not be revived. His loss forced the immediate cancellation of the competition, standing as a devastating reminder that in extreme environments, surviving the elements does not guarantee surviving the physical toll. Mavi successfully returned from the deep, only to face an invisible failure within his own body, an unforgiving reality that echoes an older tragedy, where another pioneer trusted a roaring jet engine to carry him across a Scottish lake, only to find that water can be just as fatal on the surface. Number 2. Nick Piantanida. The Limits of the Sky. Nick Piantanida was an amateur parachute jumper driven by a singular, overwhelming ambition to set the absolute record for the highest parachute and freefall jump. Operating during the space race era of the 1960s, a time defined by pushing the boundaries of the sky, he planned to achieve unprecedented heights using a hot air balloon. His determination was evident when a February 1966 attempt was aborted due to an oxygen line problem invalidating a potential record of 123,500 feet on a technicality. Yet he refused to abandon his pursuit. In May 1966, Piantanida initiated another ascent, aiming to jump from 120,000 feet. As his gondola climbed through the thinning atmosphere, the environment grew increasingly hostile. At 57,000 feet, a critical equipment failure occurred. His pressurized suit suffered a sudden and catastrophic depressurization. Trapped in an environment devoid of oxygen, he was completely incapacitated. The ground control center was forced to remotely activate the gondola's emergency parachute to bring him down. The emergency descent brought him back to Earth, but the physiological damage had already been done. Piantanida suffered massive tissue damage and lapsed into a coma, eventually passing away in the hospital 4 months later. His tragic attempt remains a chilling reminder of the lethal, unforgiving nature of the upper atmosphere, where survival depends entirely on the flawless function of a single piece of equipment. Number 1. Witter Roslin. Farewell Flight. For Witter Roslin, the sky was not a place to chase adrenaline, but a sanctuary she was ready to leave behind. Operating with the exact discipline she utilized daily as an offshore oil rig inspector, she had safely completed hundreds of jumps worldwide. By late 2012, the seasoned pilot was 4 months pregnant and made the definitive choice to retire from extreme sports entirely. She planned one final farewell flight on September 12th in the Swiss mountains near Stalin. Everything appeared routine as other flyers launched before her without issue. But shortly after Witter stepped into the familiar open air, her descent deteriorated rapidly. She was falling far too fast, and tragically, her parachute failed to deploy. Onlookers watched helplessly as she struggled to correct the terrifying malfunction. In her final seconds, witnesses reported seeing her spread her arms wide, perhaps a last desperate attempt to stabilize, or a quiet acceptance of the inevitable. The fatal impact turned what was meant to be a peaceful closing chapter into a permanent, heartbreaking end. Witter's devastating loss was an isolated nightmare of deployment failure. But just 3 months later, the community would learn that perfectly functioning equipment is utterly useless when a lethal threat violently crashes into you from a fellow jumper. These stories are not an invitation to fear ambition, but a reminder to respect the moment when risk stops being reasonable. Skill can reduce danger, yet it cannot erase poor communication equipment failure, pressure, fatigue, or an environment that changes without warning. The safest decision is sometimes the least dramatic one. Pause, check again, speak up, or walk away. Remembering these lives means looking beyond the spectacle and recognizing that preparation, honest limits, and responsible support matter more than any record headline or applause. Every ending leaves another unopened file behind. Beyond these disturbing tragedies are countless extreme sports disasters, fatal record attempts, survival stories, and moments when human endurance collided with forces no one could fully control. The last reels will keep searching for those overlooked warnings, not to celebrate catastrophe, but to understand what they can still teach us. If this journey changed the way you see courage and risk, leave a like, subscribe, and stay close. The next story may already be waiting in the dark.